one of the most heinous and insidious genocides of the 21st century. This event is designed to educate and inspire. It creates space for open discussion about these human rights and medical atrocities, offering a clear overview and practical solutions to prevent further abuse. Let us work together to stop forced organ harvesting. Today, on the anniversary of the International Day of Genocide Prevention, we reflect on the global impact of the persecution of Falun Gong, the efforts to destroy this spiritual practice, and the weaponization of medicine that has enabled a concealed and largely undetected genocide. Before we begin, please allow me to welcome our audience that is watching us on live stream via Epoch TV, NTT TV, and Ganjin World. Thank you for joining us today. Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, or DAFOH for short, is an international NGO based in Washington, D.C., and was founded by medical doctors in 2006 when the news broke of evidence of forced organ harvesting. DAFOH's mission is to inform and educate the international medical community, governments, and the public about forced organ harvesting and the ongoing human rights abuse in China. DAFOH has published numerous independent reports and research on forced organ harvesting and has been 3 times nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. DAFOH has also received the prestigious Mother Teresa Award for Social Justice in 2019. Let us now hear from our distinguished speakers, experts in their domains. Our first speaker is Mr. Jim Shannon, who has served as a member of the British Parliament for 15 years. As the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on International Freedom of Religion or Belief, Mr. Shannon has broad experience on human rights efforts relevant to our topic today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker.
Hi everyone, it's Jim Shannon, Member of Parliament, the chair of the All-Party Group for International Freedom of Religion and Belief. Today I want to talk about the systematic targeting and human rights violations against the Falun Gong in China, which have been taking place for over 2 decades. I've spoken on this many times in the chamber. The Falun Gong are a religious minority who are facing increasing mass surveillance, torture and arbitrary detention. Horrifically, credible reports have also emerged of live organ harvesting, some indicated on a commercial scale, and the evidence seems to point towards that. Without consent, detainees have had vital organs such as their heart, kidneys and livers removed under the official and legal knowledge of the Chinese authorities. Falun Gong practitioners are subjected to coerced blood tests and other medical examinations. Converting detention centres into so-called organ registries serves the dual purpose for the Chinese authorities, further suppressing Falun Gong practitioners while also creating a supply of organs that results in unusually short waiting times. Institutions such as the United Nations and the European Union have very widely condemned the practice of organ harvesting, which targets ethnic and religious minority detainees. And despite a widespread global condemnation, the Chinese Communist Party has continued this appalling practice, this awful organ harvesting, and will continue to do so unless we take the free world takes a collective stand against such blatant abuses of human rights. So today, I urge you who are listening, watching, and taking the words today to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. We must make sure that the Chinese Communist Party cannot act with impunity, and we must also stand up for ethical transplant practices and help stop the forced organ harvesting of living prisoners of conscience in China by calling for international and independent investigations of the crimes committed against the Falun Gong practitioners. I pray, and I will be praying for my brothers and sisters caught in this horrific practice. Live organ harvesting must never ever be tolerated, and we must raise our voices to ensure that it's brought to an end. Thank you for listening. God bless you. Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon, for these important remarks. Next, I would like to introduce distinguished Professor Wendy Rogers. Professor Rogers played a leading role in developing Australia's 2007 National Health and Medical Research Council's guidelines for organ and tissue donation, as well as the current revision of the National Research Ethics Guideline in her role on the Australian Health Ethics Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now hear from our speaker.
I'm Wendy Rogers. I'm the chair of the International Advisory Committee of Epoch, which is the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. And I thank the organisers of this meeting for allowing me and inviting me to speak today. Epoch is an international organisation that has been building awareness of forced organ harvesting in a formal capacity when we first became an NGO since the late 2010s. We try and build awareness of forced organ harvesting through a number of mechanisms, and I think you'll be hearing from other people about, for example, the China Tribunal, which was held in the UK, which we organised, and that brought together very definitive evidence of forced organ harvesting and the fact that crimes of humanity were being committed against the Falun Gong in China. As an international organisation, we seek to have some impact. It's hard to stop the Chinese from acting as they do in the arena of forced organ harvesting, but I'd like to mention initiatives that we undertake that try and have some impact while acknowledging that it's difficult to actually change things in China significantly at this point. One of the things we've done, which has proved quite effective, is to seek the retraction of unethical research papers that are published that have been based on the use of organs taken from prisoners of conscience, obviously without their consent. And that's been relatively successful. Today, we published a paper reporting the unethical papers, and to date, 49 of these have been retracted, and we're working on with publishers to seek retraction of many more of those. The second area where we've been working recently is to bring attention to the fact that there are connections with forced organ trafficking and the broader concern about business and human rights that's been relevant internationally. To that end, we worked with Global Rights Compliance, which is an international human rights legal organisation based in the UK, and they did independent research and formulated advice and policy guidance, and this is called Do No Harm, and it's available from their own website and from our website. This work is very unusual. It's a world first. It identifies all the stakeholders involved in transplantation and how they have obligations under human rights legislation to really pay attention to who they're interacting with and what's happening at the end of those supply chains. So, for example, clinicians may be involved in training Chinese surgeons who then go back to be involved in forced organ harvesting. Hospitals may be involved in reciprocal visits, reciprocal training between hospitals in China that are engaged in forced organ harvesting in their own institutions. And universities may have research agreements that run between Chinese universities that are associated or implicated in forced organ harvesting. Journals can publish and can and do and have published unethical research based on some of these collaborations. And transplant societies who host meetings need also to be very aware of who they've invited to speak or who they've permitted to speak and whether they are in fact involved in forced organ harvesting. So these documents from Global Rights Compliance spell out how to do human rights due diligence for all of the different stakeholders to ensure that they're not in any way implicated in forced organ harvesting in China. And the third activity of ours that I'd like to mention are our legislative endeavours. So we're an international organisation, so we work across multiple jurisdictions. For example, in the US, we've been providing support for the US initiatives, two recent acts that have been passed, the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act and the Falun Gong Protection Act. The latter also offers protections for other minority groups and prisoners of conscience, although it's named for the Falun Gong. We're supporting endeavours in the UK and Canada. And in Australia, we've got a particular focus on amendments to the criminal code, where we're seeking for an amendment of the definition of organ trafficking. Currently, it focuses on trafficking of persons, and we need this to be expanded to include trafficking of organs and to have extraterritorial reach, as this will then prevent Australian citizens from going and seeking trafficked organs. We're also urging compliance across all jurisdictions with the Council of Europe Convention Against Trafficking in Human Organs, which is very clear in bringing forward those distinctions about trafficking in organs versus trafficking in persons. And finally, I'd like to end by noting the recent policy outcomes from the Brussels summit from the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, who put out a statement of legislative intent on forced organ harvesting. And in a statement, IPAC said its members condemn the abhorrent practice of forced organ harvesting, and they wish to advance legislation to prohibit and prevent forced organ harvesting and organ trafficking for all members of the Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rogers, for sharing your insights with us today. Our next speaker is Mr. Harry van Bommel, a former member of the Dutch Parliament who is actively engaged in protecting the human rights of Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Ahmadis, and advises NGOs on a range of issues, including conflict prevention. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker.
My name is Harry van Bommel. I was a member of Parliament in the Netherlands for nearly 19 years. From 1998 until 2017. During my time in office, human rights were always on the forefront of my agenda. The situation in China, especially regarding Uyghurs, Tibetans and Falun Gong practitioners, has always had my warm attention. It's very unfortunate to see that the fate of Uyghurs and Tibetans got internationally and also in the Netherlands much attention. The situation of Falun Gong practitioners, although it is widely known by those who are really interested in China, did not get the attention that it should get. Therefore, I was very happy to be part of a seminar that was held exactly a year ago. This seminar was organized by Global Human Rights Defense, Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, and the Dutch Foundation for Falun Gong Practitioners. During this seminar, we talked to witnesses of the human rights violations against Falun Gong practitioners, scientists, doctors, and others, and of course to Falun Gong practitioners in the Netherlands. The evidence of forced organ harvesting on Falun Gong practitioners in China by the Chinese government is overwhelming. There is a report by Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting that was presented during this seminar. There are reports written by the international well-known lawyer David Matas, and there are reports by several parliaments. The United States Parliament is involved, the Canadian Parliament is involved. Unfortunately, we see in Europe not as much attention for the Falun Gong practitioners as there is for Uyghurs and Tibetans. So this was an important event last year during the International Human Rights Day. The event was also a momentum to petition the Dutch Parliament in order to get attention for the situation of Falun Gong practitioners in China. The testimonial given by a witness coming from China, now living in Denmark, was very impressive. And I think that everybody present at the seminar was not only interested but also convinced that action should be taken to make sure that there is an end to the forced organ harvesting in China, especially when it is related to Falun Gong practitioners. As I said, the evidence is convincing and overwhelming. Not just in the reports that I just mentioned, but also in the testimonials. So I'm very happy that in the United States of America, a Falun Gong Protection Act has passed the House of Representatives. It is now under debate in the United States whether this act should actually become law. This act aims at three things. First of all, the United States should not cooperate with China when it comes to organ transplantation. Secondly, it aims at coercing China to end the practice of forced organ harvesting. And thirdly, it aims at international collaboration with organizations and countries that are striving to end the forced organ harvesting in China. I think that the United States Falun Gong Petition Act should serve as an example to countries worldwide. To begin with, my own country, the Netherlands. So we will go on campaigning the Dutch Parliament, but it should go further. It should also be passed by European Parliament. European governments in general should work together to end the forced organ harvesting in China. What we see in China is a so-called cold genocide. It means a genocide in slow motion. It means that certain aspects of society, of daily life, are not available to Falun Gong practitioners, such as housing, healthcare, education, work. This so-called cold genocide should get more attention. We have to prevent that the cold genocide that is taking place in China becomes a forgotten genocide. In order to reach this point, we should work together, we should campaign together. I'm very happy with the seminar today, where this speech can be a contribution, and I hope to work together with Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting in the future to make sure that European countries, the Netherlands, being the capital of international law, may be the first to work together on ending the Chinese practice of forced organ harvesting. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bommel, for your comments. Next, I would like to present Sir Geoffrey Nice KC, one of the UK's most distinguished human rights lawyers who has contributed greatly for the cause of international criminal justice. In 2017, he chaired the China Tribunal on Forced Organ Harvesting of Prisoners of Conscience. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker.
Thank you for inviting me to contribute to this significant gathering. My name is Geoffrey Nice, and my involvement in affairs concerning the Falun Gong is that I chaired a tribunal, the China Tribunal, the judgment of which was delivered 5 years ago. And in that judgment, no finding of genocide was made. There were findings of crimes against humanity and torture. I've been asked today to focus on genocide in a more theoretical way, and I assume that some in the audience will know very little of the detail of the law concerning genocide, and some will know a great deal. It's probably therefore sensible for me to summarize the position and then to say what I want to add that's particular to the problems of the Falun Gong. The term genocide arose effectively because of the failure of the United States of America in the First World War to respond to known massacre of the Armenians by the Turks. Efforts to get the Americans to take action in another country to stop the massacre, 800,000 to 1 million people, came to nothing. And after the First World War, an Armenian activist called Soghomon Tehlirian found the principal generator of the massacre, from the previous regime in Turkey, now living in Berlin, having been convicted in his absence of crimes by the new regime in Turkey, but Germany having no extradition treaty with Turkey, so Pasha Talat was his name, lived in Germany, in Berlin. And a young, or fairly young, Armenian activist, Soghomon Tehlirian, found him, shot him dead, was tried and acquitted. The trial was the subject of newspaper reports around the world, including to Lviv, then in Poland, where a young philologist by the name of Raphael Lemkin was appalled at how this was the only method of achieving justice, where injustice of the worst possible kind had been the subject of no action by the United States of America, largely because of their implacable belief in sovereignty. And Lemkin went on to become, he gave up being a philologist and became a lawyer and became obsessed by the problem that had worried him, escaped to America in the Second World War, he being Jewish, and all his family, bar one, 50-odd people, being massacred in the Holocaust, returned to the Nuremberg trials and worried the prosecutors with his new term that he'd written about in a book in 1944, I think. The term was genocide. Different from the present formulation of the term, but that's how the term came to be used by all of you watching this presentation and attending to the meeting of which it will be a part. The term was not converted into a law at Nuremberg trials of Nazi leaders, but Lemkin went to New York for reasons that we can go into perhaps in the discussion, and led to the Genocide Convention being formed. The Genocide Convention is very particular in what it requires to be proved for genocide to be proved. And what it requires is a particular intention in the mind of the perpetrator. The intention is the intention to destroy in whole or part a group, and the Falun Gong are clearly a suitable group for this purpose, to destroy a group in whole or part, simply because of whom they are. And that is the wickedness of genocide. Genocide does not require the proof of killing people in large numbers. It can be established in other ways that result in no actual deaths. It's the mental state that is critically important. And in the China tribunal, where we'd been commissioned, I and 6 other people, having no interest in the Falun Gong, no interest in China, but just as citizens of the world, to look into the facts and the law, we, although some of us may have had legal training, forgot that. We treated ourselves as citizens and jurors, if you like, to decide what facts were proved and what the law was. We found all the facts necessary for proof of genocide to have been established, but we took advice on the law from outside. We allowed ourselves to be directed by highly authoritative lawyers on what the law was. And what was made clear to us was this: the widespread killing of Falun Gong for the purpose of extracting their organs for sale on the commercial transplant market was in part, or maybe in principle, a commercial purpose, to use their organs to make money. Now, there may have been an associated genocidal intention to destroy the group as such. But we noticed also that some Falun Gong who'd been arrested and detained were released rather than killed. And so we found that we were unable, in the circumstances and on the evidence then available, to be satisfied that the intention was the genocidal intention rather than, in principle, the commercial one. It's of no concern to us, and I don't mean that to sound harsh, it's of no concern to us that this may have been a disappointment, because we were not there either to satisfy or to disappoint people reading our judgment. What we were concerned to do and did was to create a judgment that could not be attacked, and it has not been attacked or deconstructed. It stands unchallenged, of course. The People's Republic of China damns it, but without explanation. Other than that, it is unchallenged. It is a platform from which others can work. Later evidence can be added. Further conclusions can be drawn. The law can be expanded. All things we should not do, simply as citizens applying the law on genocide to the facts as we found it. And so that is where I will start in the discussions on Wednesday, and I look forward to being a part of those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Nice, for these remarks. Our next speaker is international human rights lawyer, Mr. David Mattis. He and his colleague, the late David Kilgore, were among the first to investigate forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners nearly 2 decades ago. And since that time, Mr. Mattis has never ceased in his efforts to provide expert analysis of the evidence to decision makers and activists around the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker.
Since the publication of the article called Genocide, Falun Gong in China, in Genocide Studies and Prevention, an international journal, in 2018 that I co-authored with Torsten Trey, Maria Chung, and Richard Ann, there are 2 developments worth noting. One is the 2019 statement of Li Beijing. The second is the judgment of the China Tribunal in 2020. The Cold Genocide article states, and I quote, in November 30th, 1999, Li Lanqing announced to 3,000 fellow Chinese Communist Party officials at the Great Hall of Beijing a policy against Falun Gong to defame their reputations, bankrupt them financially, and destroy them physically. The citation for this statement provides, in part, sources of this information is an interview with Li Beijing, who attended the November 30th, 1999 meeting. Li Beijing in 2019 provided a statement to the China Organ Harvest Research Center posted on their website, which states in part, quote, on November 26, 1999, Li Lanqing, then member of the Chinese Communist Party Politburo Standing Committee and head of the party's central leading group for handling the Falun Gong issue, said that from then on the persecution must be intensified and must destroy them politically, bankrupt them financially, and ruin their reputation. So the 2019 statement, in that statement, Li Beijing does not attribute to Li Lanqing the statement, destroy the Falun Gong physically. Rather, the statement of Li Beijing is that Li Lanqing stated, destroy them politically. Whether the second version is a change or a correction, there's no independent version of what was said. The second development is the judgment of the China Tribunal of 2020. In that judgment, the tribunal concluded, with certainty, beyond reasonable doubt, that Falun Gong were being killed for their organs. However, the tribunal did not find the killing to be a genocide. The tribunal wrote, and I quote, "The tribunal noted that it was possible to characterize what had occurred as the implementation of a policy to develop the market for organ transplants where Falun Gong practitioners and Uyghurs served unfortunately as a ready and rich resource to meet demand, such that the infliction of forced organ harvesting on these groups was not primarily motivated by the intention to exterminate these groups in whole or in part." Both of these developments argue against the conclusion that I and my co-authors reached that the mass killing of Falun Gong for their organs is genocide. My own view nonetheless remains the same, that what happened and is happening with the mass killing of Falun Gong for their organs is a genocide. Genocidal intent can be established by expressions of intent. It can also be explained by behavior when there's no other explanation for that behavior. The current version of the statement of Li Beizhen removes from consideration the expression of intent earlier attributed to him. We are left for consideration whether there's any explanation for the mass killing of Falun Gong for their organs other than an intent to destroy the group in whole or in part. The reasoning of the China tribunal that there is another explanation, that the organs of Falun Gong were a ready and rich resource to meet demand for organs, is, I suggest, unpersuasive. The prototype genocide, the mass killing which led to the adoption of the Genocide Convention, was the Holocaust. The Holocaust, in addition to being a mass killing, was a massive theft. Jewish property was systematically plundered. Artworks were stolen, businesses were expropriated, residents were appropriated, jewelry was stolen, gold was extracted from fillings, dentures, and dental caps of Jewish victims, and so on. Auschwitz survivor Rudolf Verba spoke of robbery of Jews as an integral part of the Holocaust. Yet I am not aware of anyone today who argues that the Holocaust was not a genocide because of that theft. Though it is true that the Holocaust was a massive misappropriation of Jewish assets, the reason the Jews were the victims of this misappropriation was not that they had assets which Nazis coveted. The reason for the victimization was plain and simple, that they were Jewish. One can say something similar about forced organ harvesting in Falun Gong. Practitioners of Falun Gong today are not subject to organ theft because they have organs. Everyone in China has organs. Nor are they subject to organ theft because their exercises generate healthy organs. Practitioners of Falun Gong are far from the only persons in China who exercise systematically. What makes practitioners of Falun Gong the target of forced organ harvesting when others, aside from prisoners of conscience, other prisoners of conscience, are not, is that they are practitioners of Falun Gong. It is their identity which makes them the victims, not the money to be made from their victimization. One has to keep in mind the nature of Chinese Communist Party rule over China. The party is not some distant bureaucracy in Beijing who lets the rest of the country do as they please. The party is found rather in every nook and cranny of the country, behind every government official. No matter what part of the country and no matter what level of government, there is a party factotum instructing the government official what to do. The Chinese constitutional dictate imposing leadership of the party over China is taken literally to the most minute level of activity in China. Moreover, what concerns the party most, that is to say almost entirely, is not money. It is survival of the party as the governing force over China. As well, strange as it may seem to outsiders, the party has the paranoid view that the practice of Falun Gong is the primary threat to their continued dominance over China. Xi Jinping, President of China and General Secretary of the Communist Party Central Committee, addressing the Political and Legal Affairs Commission of the party in October 22, stated to the commission that Falun Gong have developed into the party's most prominent opposition force. The perception of this development was not new to 2022. It was a perception which shaped the party since November 1999, as we can see even from the revised statement of Li Beijing, after the initial party announcement in July 1999 that the practice of Falun Gong was banned had led to widespread protests. So the notion of the China tribunal that the mass killing of Falun Gong for their organs is not a genocide because of the money to be made from the killings is misplaced. That perspective ignores the history of the Holocaust and the nature of Communist Party rule over China. The conclusion originally reached in the Cold Genocide article that the mass killing of Falun Gong for their organs is a genocide remains, in my view, sound. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mattis, for your important insights. Our next speaker is Mr. Nima Gholam-Alipour, who is a member of the Swedish Parliament and an author specialized in the issues of international migration and ethnic relations. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker.
The world speaks today of the importance of human rights. Yet, at the same time, one of the most powerful nations on earth commits crimes against humanity by forcibly removing people's organs and trading them on the open market. If democratic nations accept this organ trade, then they can no longer credibly claim to stand for human rights. To give true weight to the concept of human rights, more politicians must have the courage to speak about organ trade carried out by the Communist Party of China. If we cannot stand up against such a vile act, where a person is stripped of their organs by the state, then we have not earned the right to speak of human rights at all. This has been going on for many years. The reports exist, the testimonies are numerous, but the silence is deafening. The Chinese Communist Party has used its power to persuade far too many politicians and opinion makers that this is not happening, or that it is limited to a few isolated cases. Those who believe the lies of the Chinese Communist Party stand on the wrong side of history. Posterity will judge you. It has never been morally right to steal another person's organ. These despicable acts will never become right, no matter how powerful the Chinese Communist Party becomes. There will always be people who stand up for human dignity and for every human being's right to their own body. This is not merely a Chinese issue, it is a human issue. It concerns whether our values are more than just words written in a declaration. If Europe truly means what it says about human rights, then let us be clear. No state should be able to murder its citizens to sell their organs. No doctor trained in Sweden should ever participate in such a system. No Swedish citizen should be allowed to travel to China to buy an organ, because it is not an organ they're buying, it is human beings they are buying. What is happening in China is a test for all of humanity. It is not merely about transplants, it's about the very idea of human worth. If a state can take a person's organs, it can also take their freedom, their faith, their children, and ultimately their soul. This organ trade is not just a crime against bodies, it is a crime against the very concept of civilization. Every generation faces its moral test. Our time is being tested now, not in trenches or through war, but in our willingness to speak out when evil wears a suit and talks business. We must dare to speak even when it is uncomfortable. For it is when the world is silent that history repeats itself. And we know that sound, that silence. It sounded the same in the Soviet Union. It has sounded the same every time human beings have been reduced to numbers, categories, or resources. We must stop being silent. The people whose organs were taken, they have no graves, no memorials, no ballot papers, but we here in the free democracies can be their voice. We can ensure that their deaths are not in vain. We can stand against a system that measures human worth in market prices. We can stay silent or we can speak. We can look away or we can see. We can choose comfort or we can choose humanity. Let us speak plainly. This is an industry built on blood, and silence is complicity. As long as the Chinese Communist regime continues its organ trade, as long as people are killed for their beliefs, as long as the world pretends nothing is happening, it is our duty to to keep speaking out and to keep protesting against the Chinese Communist Party's organ trade, because human dignity has no price, and it is our duty to remind the world of that.
Thank you, Mr. Ghalam Alipour, for sharing your remarks with us today. Our next speaker is Mrs. Nicole Höchst, who is a member of the German Bundestag. As we will hear, she's appalled by the forced organ harvesting and is eager to introduce legislation to stop it. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, we urgently need to debate an issue that touches the very foundations of our civilization. The inviolable dignity of the human person, of every human being, whether rich or poor, whether living in safety or under an authoritarian regime, whether Christian, Falun Gong practitioner, victim of war, or political prisoner. This is about organ trafficking. This is about transplant tourism. It is about the exploitation of defenseless human beings, often disguised as medical necessity, economic calculation, or state-sponsored repression. And the current situation is clear. Organ trafficking continues to expand. Authoritarian regimes violate human rights with impunity. International transplant chains remain opaque, and Europe still lacks the legal instruments necessary to stop this abuse. Precisely because this is the reality today, we need a law that ends impunity, closes loopholes, demands full transparency, and ensures that no organ ever enters our medical system without verified voluntary consent, lawful origin, and medical safety. Why is this law so necessary? We have known for many years, long before the most recent reports from China, North Korea, Pakistan, or the great transplant market in Ukraine, that organ trafficking is not an abstract threat. It's a daily reality. Independent investigations, including those by David Kilgore and David Matters, already demonstrated in 2006 how political prisoners in China were used as a source of organs. Journalist Ethan Goodman reached similar conclusions in The Slaughter. I will offer the links for everyone to exploit in the description. In 2021, the United Nations human rights experts raised the alarm again. Again, you will receive the link for further reading. And these are not isolated cases, but systematic and long-standing human rights violations. Simultaneously, conflict zones, particularly Ukraine, are misused in both Eastern and Western narratives to spread disinformation. EU versus disinfo documents this extensively. You can read this in the link about Ukraine conflict and battlefields becoming interesting for illegal trading of internal organs. Not everything that is claimed to be is true, but not everything is false either. This is precisely why we need strict legal principles that safeguard human dignity and exclude any abuse without falling prey to propaganda from any side. We must address Germany's role, and this is imperative. We must also speak frankly about ourselves. A significant share of Europe's transplant tourists come from Germany. Our high medical standards, our insurance system, and our excellent post-operative care attract patients who seek transplants in countries with completely opaque organ sources. If we want to combat organ trafficking, we cannot ignore this uncomfortable reality. Responsibility begins at home. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights know no political walls, because this issue concerns inalienable human rights. It must transcend political party lines. Human dignity is universal. It must not be relativized by domestic political wars or tactical divisions. A nation that takes democracy and human rights seriously must defend these principles without exception. We need to address shared values of Christianity and Falun Gong. Many of those targeted by organ harvesting are Christians and Falun Gong practitioners. Despite theological differences, both faiths emphasize core moral values: truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Christianity teaches truth, charity, and mercy. Falun Gong teaches Shen, Shan, Ren. Sorry if I pronounce it in the wrong way. Truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. A society in which these values are suppressed, persecuted, and in the most literal sense cut out of the bodies of innocent people would be a society that has lost its moral compass entirely. This shared ethical foundation makes it clear protecting these people is not merely political necessity, it is a moral imperative. What this law delivers. The law introduces for the first time binding due diligence obligations, binding documentation requirements, and binding import controls for organs. Its core principles are simple. No organ retrieval without voluntary informed consent. No transplantation without full, verifiable proof of origin. No imports from countries with opaque and unreliable procurement systems. No business models that exploit poverty, coercion, and political detention. And crucially, the law criminalizes transplant tourism, including actions committed abroad. This closes the central gap that has existed in German law for far too long. And perhaps this is the case for other nations also. We need to protect religious freedom. Organ harvesting often targets individuals who cannot defend themselves, especially those persecuted for their faith. Christians, Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, and other minorities in authoritarian regimes have been systematically dehumanized and reduced to biological resources. This law sends a clear message. Germany will no longer be a silent beneficiary of state-backed human rights crimes. Well, we need to talk as well about the protection of recipients. Recipients also deserve protection. They have the right to know, where did the organs come from? Was the donation voluntary? Does it meet international medical standards? What risks arise from unclear or falsified documentation? WHO guidelines and the Declaration of Istanbul have long demanded exactly these safeguards. This law that I would really love to introduce to German, to our system, finally enforces them. And this is why the state must act. Organ trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It attracts organized crime. It thrives on corruption, coercion, and human desperation. Self-commitments do not work. Conferences do not work. And someone really should do something does not work at all. We need deterrent criminal penalties, tamper-proof documentation, effective controls, and clear import bans. I'm so thankful for this conference in order to be in the position to introduce my thoughts about the necessity of lawmaking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Hoogst, for this inspiring message. Our next speaker is Dr. Harold King. Dr. King is the director of the French Affiliate of Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, where he has organized and hosts many international conferences to bring the brutality of forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners to the light of day. Dr. King holds that not only are the lives of Falun Gong practitioners being taken, but the very principles of human dignity are under attack. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now hear from our speaker.
A new era has started. The tide is turning for the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, as world leaders discover its aggressive and violent nature and the true cost of its human rights violations inside and outside China. On the 77th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Human Rights and the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, in short, the Genocide Convention, I think it important to reiterate to the international community the undetected cold genocide of over 70 million Falun Gong practitioners and the weaponization of medicine occurring in China for the last 26 years. Europe is the birthplace of human rights. Europe has suffered centuries of wars, reaching its peak with the Second World War, where the world discovered the horrors of the Nazi regime, the extermination of the Jewish people, and the medical and pharmaceutical experiments of the Nazi doctors. Never again crystallized the people's will to ensure that the Nazi horrors would never return. The Declaration of Human Rights and the Genocide Convention defined the fundamental rights of all people and embodied a commitment to prevent and combat actions that endanger humanity and erode the dignity, security, and sanctity of human life. The Nuremberg Code and the 1964 Declaration of Helsinki ensured that the inhumane medical experimentation would never be possible in medicine. Organ transplants were made possible through the respect of free and voluntary consent for organ donations. Today, humanity is confronting the egregious slaughter of Falun Gong practitioners and other prisoners of conscience for their organs in China. Surgical organ removal occurs while they are alive and is a form of commercialized murder by doctors to fuel a multi-billion-dollar transplant tourism industry. Killing people for their organs is a crime against humanity and a disgrace to the universal human rights. Since forcibly taking over China in 1949, the CCP has never ceased its human rights violations and has waged a war against faith, freedom and democracy. It considers the existence of liberty, religion and democracy anywhere in the world as an existential threat against itself. Human rights violations in China reached their peak under the late CCP leader Jiang Zemin, who used the full power of the nation to attack Falun Gong, a spiritual practice considered a religion inside and outside China, when launched his brutal persecution on the 20th July 1999. Jiang Zemin saw Falun Gong as more than just a school of Qigong, more than just a religion. He saw that the three principles of Falun Gong, truthfulness, compassion and forbearance, could expose the dysfunction of the party through its false, violent and intolerant ideology towards humanity, religions, freedom and democracy. Jiang Zemin's intent to destroy Falun Gong practitioners is clearly characterized by the setting up of the 610 office, an extra-legal police force with encompassing powers, and his nationally declared orders to destroy physically Falun Gong practitioners. Jiang Zemin adopted a new form of genocide to avoid detection and divert the international community's investigations after the 1989 Tiananmen student massacre that caused the CCP to lose international favor and to receive financial and political sanctions. Acknowledged by peers in the study of genocide, the persecution of Falun Gong is recognized as a cold genocide that secrecy provides the CCP with unlimited time to exterminate the religion of Falun Gong and its belief. The cold genocide of Falun Gong practitioners is the slow, long-term and unrestricted destruction of the Falun Gong community. A genocide that is normalized and accepted by the Chinese and international communities through a constant barrage of propaganda and disinformation. A cold genocide is what confused and deceived the world. Worse still, the CCP's display of power and will to dominate the transplant field heavily influenced the academic, medical and political communities to lower their guard on the medical ethics and to unconsciously accept the corrupt and lowered norms allowed in China. The CCP's international propaganda and censorship campaigns provide fertile ground for medical and pharmaceutical companies, hospitals and universities to invest and become profoundly intertwined but directly implicated in its invisible human rights abuses. Doctors were the first to encounter China's transplant tourism, but they could not understand the real significance of its fast growth, remaining subdued by China's political and financial manipulations. International institutions and governments were overwhelmed by the CCP's worldwide display of power. No one had imagined that the CCP would use transplant surgery to exterminate Falun Gong, and what's more, ensure that every nation would become somehow implicated in its annihilation. Our free and democratic society could not see the new horrors and their implications for the 21st century. Falun Gong practitioners enduring persecution are faced with the choice of physical death or spiritual death to escape persecution. The international community was faced with willful blindness or societal assassination by the CCP on an international scale. Silence is the main facilitator of cold genocide. Fear, jealousy and greed are the means to enforce it. The CCP did not hesitate to use honey traps, blackmail and other political and financial incentives to manipulate and force the free and democratic communities to accept the unacceptable. The abundant evidence of the cold genocide against Falun Gong and the public petitions asking to stop these inhumane crimes were ignored by the CCP-infiltrated United Nations Human Rights Council, the World Medical Association and the World Health Organization, so that the mass murders silently continued unabated. In 2024, at the side event during the UPR in China at the Geneva United Nations, DAFOH proposed the creation of a special rapporteur on forced organ harvesting of living prisoners of conscience in China, and called for the establishment of an international criminal tribunal for forced organ harvesting in China at the United Nations. Both requests were ignored, and the Office of the Genocide Prevention and the responsibility to protect remained silent. The CCP's United Front propaganda network has been highly effective to the point that compared to other genocides, the 26 years of persecution of Falun Gong stands out because it's seldom mentioned in professional literature, medical journals and the international community, and yet it is the most highly documented, analyzed crime against humanity since its launch on the 20th of July 1999. The intent to silence the international community is identical to the intent to destroy Falun Gong practitioners, which is to stop people of the world from hearing about the religion of Falun Gong and its principle of truthfulness, compassion and tolerance. After 2 decades of ongoing forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners in China, we have to acknowledge a stark reality. As an international community, we have failed to stop this crime against humanity and cold genocide. A decisive stance against practices like forced organ harvesting and the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners is not just a test of political will, but a moral imperative for the preservation of human dignity and universal rights. In June 2024, Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting and the international NGO Ending Transplant Abuse in China, ETAC, initiated the G7+7 petition, calling upon the heads of states of the G7 nations and 7 other countries that stand out due to their large transplant numbers, their population size, their geographical location, or their exposure to organ trafficking. Last year, On the 10th of December, the petition had collected 49,000 signatures. This December, only 1 year later, the G7+7 petition collected close to 500,000 signatures, a significant tenfold increase. People who learn about these crimes are appalled by the world silence and the lack of international action in adequately addressing China's transplant crimes. The people who signed our petition want their governments to stand up for what's right and protect innocent lives, including Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, and other prisoners of conscience in China. The petition calls for the initiation of measures to inform citizens and protect them from being complicit in forced organ harvesting, to halt any exchange in transplant-related practice, research, or training with China. It also calls to initiate annual parliamentary hearings regarding China's forced organ harvesting and beginning investigations to determine accountability for acts contrary to the provision of the Genocide Convention committed against Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, and others in China. As we enter the 27th year of the persecution and forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners, we can no longer wait for the due process from international institutions. I sincerely hope that this two-day event will inspire our world leaders to universally criminalize forced organ harvesting, uphold international human rights, and comprehensively defend and protect international law by launching a mandate at the International Court of Justice and apply all forms of political and financial sanctions to stop the persecution and forced organ harvesting as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. King, for your comments. Our next speaker is Dr. Zhirwan Wang. Dr. Wang is the chairman of the World Organization to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong, an international NGO which has been pivotal in researching and collecting evidence of forced organ harvesting. He is also the chairman of the Global Service Center for Quitting the Chinese Communist Party, which has helped over 455 million Chinese people relinquish their affiliation with the communist regime. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker.
各位专家、各位朋友，大家好。在纪念防止及惩治灭绝种族公约生效77年之际，我向各位报告正在持续发生的震撼人类良知的罪行——中共对法轮功持续26年的国家群体灭绝犯罪。活摘法轮功学员器官。我叫王志远，是追查国际主席、全球退党服务中心主席。我是一名曾在中国生活过、工作过的有25年军龄的前中共军人。我和我的团队自从2003年1月20日以来，一直坚持通过电话调查以及在中国大陆的调查员在中国境内调查中共迫害法轮功的罪行。自1999年底开始，中共前党魁江泽民下令发动了对法轮功的全面镇压，并操控整个国家机器，包括党、政、军、警、司法系统和医疗机构，在全国系统地实施活摘法轮功学员器官的反人类罪行。这不是个别医院或个人的行为，而是一场有计划、有组织、中国主导的国家群体灭绝犯罪活动。国家群体灭绝犯罪运动，至今这场罪行仍在持续。追查国际经过20多年的系统调查，截至2024年9月20日，在我们网站上公开发表了413篇关于中共活摘法轮功学员器官的调查报告，866个调查录音证据，2000多份资料证据，其中66个录音直接证实或承认了活摘法轮功学员器官的存在，其中包括中共中央政治局常委、军医医院院长、主任与主刀医生的直接调查录音。例如2015年追查国际调查员，我本人 以江泽民秘书的身份与中共中央政治局常委张高丽通话，要求他在政治局会议上阻止追究江泽民下令活摘几百万法轮功学员器官一事。张高丽没有否认，反而答应一定会在政治局讨论时阻止追究。这等于间接承认了内部早已知晓并默许此事。又例如2019年12月至2020年1月间，追查国际调查员，我本人也参与了电话调查取证空军军医大学西京医院移植科的医生李国伟。在调查中，李国伟明确承认可以提供法轮功学员的器官，甚至说可以让你亲眼看到这个人20来岁。令人震惊的是，即使在2020年新冠疫情最严重的时期，中国多地医院的移植手术仍照常进行。武汉疫情封城时，重庆医科大学附属医院仍照常进行肾移植。更令人毛骨悚然的是，许多医院的护士在通话中说器官我们库里有，家里有，这意味着在中国大陆仍存在器官活人供的库。这不是捐献系统，而是被圈养的活人随时可取用的死亡器官库。2023年2月2日至2023年3月21日，追查国际对涉嫌活摘法轮功学员器官的部分医院进行了新一轮的电话追查。调查结果确认，中共活摘器官仍在继续，活人供体库仍然存在。多名医生直接承认手中有多种肝脏的供体，而且等待时间极短，有的只需要1到3天即可安排手术。我想在这里强调北京永安医院张正医生的例子。他说供体每天可以看书，能睡到3点多，这就显示供体是被圈养的活人，而并不是老死亡者。但是近年来，中共在中国社会中扩大了其器官的来源，特别是儿童与婴儿器官移植的剧烈增加，暴露了新的黑色产业链。上海仁济医院公开宣称已经完成了3000多例儿童肝移植，并宣称年量世界第一。武汉协和医院、同济医院等报道出生几小时的早产婴儿被用作供体。更骇人的是，有内部线人透露，中国军方医院圈养女性人工受精，强迫怀孕，甚至让早产婴儿直接成为器官来源。这是一组制度化的人体器官的农场，医学研究被扭曲为屠杀的技术手段，孩子成了延寿的工程的原料。正如2025年9月3日中共阅兵期间习近平与普京的对话中所提到的那样，中共持续对其器官捐献系统撒谎。2015年起宣称全面的改用公民自愿捐献器官，但是追查国际对全国红十字会和 OPO 组织调查的结果显示，大部分省市根本没有真正的用作器官的捐献系统，甚至就连首都北京市红十字会多年来都没有开展器官捐献，器官捐献仍然在筹备之中。然而北京市器官移植北京市的器官移植量却高居全国第一。这说明所谓的公民捐献只是掩盖活摘的假象。这不是遥远的中国内政，而是 对整个人类文明的挑战。过去的历史中，当人类面对纳粹集中营的暴行，最遗憾的不是罪行的本身，而是世界的沉默。我们不能再让这种沉默重演。追查国际呼吁：一、联合国及欧洲各国政府立即启动独立国际调查；二、建立跨国器官伦理的审查与追责的机制；三、将活摘涉嫌的医疗机构与个人列入国际的制裁名单，以反人类罪对其实施刑事追查；四、禁止任何保险公司的公费以及公费资金支付来源不明的移植手术；五、保护吹哨者与受害者家属；六、医学界建立全球伦理封锁线，拒绝与涉嫌的中共医院合作，禁止发表联合的研究。中共不仅在杀害无辜，更在摧毁人类的医学生命与人性的道德底线。追查国际将继续追查、记录并揭露这些罪行。中共正在进行着一场针对人类道德的良知的战争，而人类历史的审判终将来临。谢谢大家。
Thank you, Dr. Wong, for your remarks. Our next speaker is Mr. Richard An. Mr. An is an attorney and the co-author of Cold Genocide, Falun Gong in China, published in the international journal Genocide Studies and Prevention. After publication, the article quickly became the most read paper in the article. Ladies and gentlemen, let us now hear from our speaker.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this important event. 7 years ago, I co-authored an academic article, The Cold Genocide of Falun Gong, with Maria Chiang, Thorsten Trey, and David Mattis. The focus of the article was to study a category of genocide that receives limited attention despite the severe level of harm and destruction inflicted on the victims. Using the case study of the forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong members, we identified 3 core characteristics of what will be described as a cold genocide. Number 1, the perpetrator's strategy is multidimensional. He seeks not only physical destruction, but also to erase the victims socially, culturally, and spiritually, such that they're not only killed, but their deaths are ignored and forgotten. Number 2, the crime is invisible due to cover-up and misinformation tactics. The strategy is not just to destroy and deny evidence of the crime, but also to malign and marginalize the victim community, such that their sufferings is ignored and overlooked by others. The third and final element is normalization, which is to erode the value system of a society so that the people no longer perceives a mass crime as an atrocity, but as something that's normal, necessary, or even heroic. Through these strategies, mass atrocities like forced organ harvesting is able to take place without creating a ripple in the society. However, the society is fundamentally transformed in the process. 7 years have passed since this article was published. Today, I would like to zoom in on one of the most concerning trends that has since emerged on the issue of forced organ harvesting, which is the transnationalization of the CCP's disinformation campaign. I will try to make sense of these developments through the lens of the cold genocide. In October this year, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly published a report titled Protecting Allied Societies from Disinformation Emanating from the People's Republic of China. The report identified 2 key developments in the Chinese regime's disinformation operations after COVID. First is the expansion of geographical scope. Whereas disinformation from China was primarily used to target its domestic population and its immediate neighborhood, the focus has now shifted to the allied societies, especially the United States. Second, the Chinese regime's disinformation strategy has shifted from defense to offense. it is no longer content with reacting to his critics, but to fundamentally invert the narrative to recast itself as the protagonist and sow discord in foreign societies. Consistent with the theory of a cold genocide, the methods of this campaign are extremely subtle, insidious, and hard to detect. The method is not simply to use a metaphorical loudspeaker and broadcast disinformation to the world. Here's how this operation actually works, as described by the NATO report. First, the disinformation campaign was orchestrated in a centralized manner by the upper echelons of the party states. The regime then uses local proxies to spread this disinformation within media ecosystems that it does not directly control. This allows the regime to conceal the origin of the message, making it appear more credible and palatable to the different communities and audiences around the world. The vectors of this disinformation include local media outlets, influencers, and social media content creators, etc. Freedom House reported in 2022 that Beijing spends several $billions annually on information manipulation, including growing investments in traditional media. The regime also engages senior Chinese officials, its diplomatic network, and private intermediaries, such as private citizens, to achieve its goals. And ultimately, through coordinating these multiple, seemingly independent relays of information, the regime amplifies its message and potentially creating viral content to the world. I wish to provide a specific example to illustrate how each of these components has been applied in the context of forced urban harvesting. As many are aware, one of the staunchest critics of CCP's forced urban harvesting is Shenyang Performing Arts. A New York-based tells the tragedy of forced urban harvesting in its performances every year. Based on the Shenyang website, the show performs in over 200 cities, reaching more than 1 million audiences each year. The show is banned in China, and the Chinese regime has been trying to shut down this performance for many years. In 2022, Chinese leader Xi Jinping issued a directive to, among others, employ disinformation in the US through neutral scholars and journalists with the aim of turning American society against Shenyang. Following this directive, a number of events took place in a coordinated fashion within the past 2 years. First, a handful of former Shenyang performers publicly alleged various wrongdoings against Shenyang that took place allegedly over a decade ago. Some of these complainants were found to have business ties to a Chinese state-run dance company that was led by several party leaders from CCP's propaganda and the United Work Front department. The allegations then became the foundation of more than a dozen articles from the New York Times criticizing Shenyang, which are all published within a narrow short time frame. The father of one of the co-authors was apparently affiliated to a CCP United Work Front organization as well. A Chinese YouTuber, again believed to have CCP ties, stated on social media that he was the one who introduced these complainants to the New York Times. And recently, these New York Times articles were then relied by the National Arts Center, which is a famous, well-known theater in Ottawa, to cancel Shenyang performance after collaborating with this show for 18 years. A recent CBC News article further revealed that the CEO of the National Arts Center met the Chinese ambassador in August 2024 and possibly in September 2023. You're free to draw your own conclusions on what's happening here. In my view, this is a prime example of an insidious, multifaceted disinformation that reflects the methods of a cold genocide played out on a global stage. By manipulating many seemingly independent pieces, even the Western mainstream media outlets, the perpetrator achieves the grand strategy of not only silencing the critics of forced urban harvesting, but to turn elements of the Western democratic societies against them, the very people who are defending the cherished values of freedom and human rights. When all that is perceived as being credible and trustworthy in the past fails, who do we believe and who do we trust? There is no easy answer to this question. with the emergence of deepfake and artificial intelligence technologies, it has become even more difficult to disentangle truth from fiction. In times like this, I encourage everyone to reflect deeply, to find the conscience within our hearts as the guiding light. And I encourage everyone to be ever vigilant and steadfast in the defense of the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. An, for sharing your thoughts with us. I'd like to thank our honored speakers for their inspiring presentations, and I invite you to attend our next session in 1 hour to listen to our lively discussion. Given the atrocity that we face as humankind, there is much more to do to end this crime against humanity. Forced organ harvesting from living prisoners of conscience can by no means or excuse be accepted in today's global community, and every doctor and every individual has to make a decision. Do I want to live in a world where a government can arbitrarily kill innocent people for their organs, or do I speak up now? I think it's time to break the silence and the national medical associations take the lead to end this atrocity. Thank you all for joining us in this first session, and we'll see you in the next. Goodbye for now. That a genocide triggers in us dismay and horror. What is unfolding behind this term? I'd like to call on the panelists to answer this one.
Well, I don't mind giving it a try. First of all, the very notion of genocide is a mass atrocity. Some international crimes can be committed just against one person or two persons, but with genocide, you're dealing with a huge crime where there has to be a significant number of victims simply for a genocide to occur. It's also a crime that can occur in peacetime. It doesn't have to occur in war, and as a result, it can occur in circumstances where you wouldn't necessarily expect it might occur. It's also based on identity. The genocide crime is based on race, religion, nationality, these sorts of groupings where the purpose of the killing is obviously wrong. There's no apparent justification for it. It's a massive killing for a wrong purpose, and as a result, it generates a lot of horror. I mean, everybody, of course, has identity of some sort or another, so it's easy to identify with this crime as being something terrible.
If I might add an important aspect of genocide, one of the aspects that is generally and internationally recognized as being important to qualify a mass atrocity, mass killing as a genocide is the intent. The intent to, and that is hard to prove, the intent to wholly or partly destroy a group. That was part of the debate when it came to the Palestinians and Israel. It was also part of the debate when it came to the genocide of 1971 of Bangladesh, in which I was an investigator. So intent is a very important aspect that we should add to the other aspects that David Mathis already mentioned.
Thank you for that. Nicole, Professor Nicole, could you chime in?
Yeah, thank you so much. What I find particularly horrifying with this genocide is that there are people making a lot of money out of it. I think this is a new side or view on those mass killings that we have to, well, wrap our brains around. And I find it very, very difficult. Thank you.
Please, Dr. Harold.
Another aspect of genocide is that in the case of Falun Gong, it's multifactorial. We generally speak about a hot genocide where masses of people are killed in one go through different means. However, this cold genocide that we're witnessing in China against the Falun Gong takes multiple forms. So the Falun Gong practitioners are destroyed socially, financially, physically as well, but also spiritually. So genocides are not just limited to mass destruction.
Thank you. You know, there appears to be some bias towards certain genocides. The Holocaust was a genocide, and we saw a genocide in Sudan, and now there are discussions about a genocide in Gaza. All of these are considered intense or hot genocides, as Dr. Harold, you just mentioned. However, the international community appears to ignore the cold genocide against Falun Gong, where millions of people were either physically or spiritually killed over the past 27 years. Should we only pay heed to the loudest genocides and forget about the hidden ones?
Well, obviously not. The problem is, of course, getting attention to it when it's done in the way it was done in China, where what you've got is a mass killing done in a closed environment. You don't get surviving victims who get off the operating table. I mean, we do have one, but we don't have large numbers. We don't even have bodies for people to see, since the bodies are all cremated. We don't have witnesses except perpetrators. Pretty much in the prisons and in the operating rooms. We don't have documents, except prison records, hospital records, which are not open to the public. In a lot of the other genocides, we have some very easily identifiable and visible signs, which makes it ready and easy to communicate. I mean, with the Holocaust, the death camps were seized by the Allies, and the bodies were just piled up there. And there was, with the other hot genocides and similar, with Rwanda or Myanmar and so on, you could just see what's going on. Whereas what you got with Falun Gong in China is not just cold in the sense that it's going slowly over time, but it's not as immediately visible as what's happening in these hot genocides. And it obviously requires the same attention, but it requires more, I would say, more effort to generate that attention and more effort to actually to see what's going on than it does with the hot genocides.
Thank you, Mr. Mattis. Maria Chung, I'd like to call on you because you've done research and you published a paper on this very matter. Could you share more on hot genocides and cold genocide in this context?
Yeah, as David has just mentioned, hot genocide, you can see it very clearly. But cold genocide, it occurs in a long period of time. And for the case of Falun Gong, it's not only physical destruction, it is the spiritual death and social death, because the Chinese Communist regime would ask the Falun Gong practitioners to recant their beliefs. If they do not recant their belief, they would very likely send to the deathbed, which is forced organ harvesting or death through torture. But if they did sign recanting their belief, they would still be monitored, and even though they're sent back to the community, they are disconnected with the community because they are always being surveillanced. And also their social environment will try to censor them. So it is a social death as well, which is well recognized by the genocide study scholars nowadays. So we need to pay attention not only to physical destruction in terms of genocide, but also other aspects of death, to recognize a genocide, which we call it a cold genocide.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to actually call on Mr. Nima Ghulam Alipour. Could you share more on this topic? Oh, you are muted.
Sorry. I think to create attention around atrocity or genocide, you have to have a common narrative, and then you have to have a communication to spread that narrative. That's very important. When it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Palestinians in Sweden, I'm a member of parliament in Sweden, they're very organized, so they can spread their narrative, and that's important. And organization is also important. Sadly enough, it should be enough that there's atrocity or a genocide, and people should do something about that. But you need the organization, the communication, and also networking. So I can give you an example, like members of parliament, they don't always have the personal resources, so they need background material about genocide or atrocities to work with the issue in parliament.
As a former member of parliament in the Netherlands, I can truly say that this is the case in the Netherlands and in more European countries, that even the politicians are not fully aware of what is happening in China. I remember maybe like some 15 years ago, a report written by Dr. David Matas was presented to Parliament, but then only a small group in Parliament was interested because it seemed such a isolated and not generally accepted fact that this was going on in China. So informing politicians, informing the wider public should be on the agenda of any organization who wants to draw attention to this genocide in slow motion. We had a very fruitful seminar in the Netherlands where we had a lady from Denmark who was a family member and in that sense a witness of the practice in China, and we had a room full of people. Still, it was very hard to get publicity because the story is not well known, and therefore also the press is not immediately attracted to a seminar or a witness story like this. So we've got a long way to cover to get this out in the open, unfortunately.
Yes, Dr. Harold.
There's another factor, I think, that blocks and interferes with the common narrative that Nima was talking about, is the fact that crimes against humanity and genocide, it's shocking and revolting, and people instinctively want to distance themselves with these things because they can't believe that it's happening or don't want to believe it. And facing these crimes is quite often difficult, be they members of parliament, governments, or the general public, or even especially doctors. There's this horror that blocks things, and this is also part of this common narrative that has to be taken into account.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, and this is for Mr. Nima. There's obviously an immense hatred in place to pursue an extinction of a race, an ethnic group, or religious group. Should those who pursue these elimination campaigns, should they be tolerated in the international community? And also then, how should they be stopped?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So absolutely not. There should be no tolerance. And the way to stop them is to have that common narrative. It's very important. And also, don't misunderstand me, lobbying is very important. So in parliaments, the organizations who lobby effectively, they are the organizations that are heard from the parliamentarians. And that's sad, but that's the way it is. So that's why organization is important. And also to explain why a struggle for human rights is more important in the long term than having trade with a good trade relationship with China, because what China has today is their economic influence, and that's something that influences a lot of politicians in Europe. So you have to have a narrative to lift up human rights even more. So you can convince more politicians that the trade with China can't be more important than human rights, and we're not there yet, sadly enough.
I want to call on Nicole. I see your hand there. Yes.
Thank you so much. Well, in my experience, tolerance, stands against economics. And, well, you're all right. Genocide and atrocities against humanity should never be tolerated worldwide. But, I'm in German parliament, and I was so hoping for more of my fellow members of parliament participating tonight and watching this and learning what you have all got to tell the world. And I don't see any, and I don't know whether anyone is here. So to generate interest for a small country like Germany, or even a small group of countries like the EU, is sometimes without the last consequence. But what we can do as small and tiny entities like Germany, we could set into place a supply chain due diligence act. So a national law forbidding, for example, the trade of organs, and the individual that is a consumer, recipient of those organs, should be held accountable before national law. I think this is one of the only possibilities that we have, because you will never get enough countries in the world to stand against such a wealthy economic like China. So let's start small in our countries with lawmaking in our countries to hold our citizens accountable for their acts and for their consumption of people's lives all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Huscht. I want to ask, as you're a member of parliament in Germany, are you seeing the attitude within parliament change in the last few recent years, or are they aware of it? Are they? Is there discussion? If you could expand, I'd love to know.
Well, as for the other groups, I cannot say. But for my group, we are aware, or some of us are aware, of what is happening in China to Falun Gong, and we see other herds of these atrocities all over the world as well. And some of my colleagues even wanted to join us tonight. What I will be doing is spread the hope on Tuesday morning, or when I will tell all my colleagues about our webinar here tonight, and we will discuss the next steps. I was so hoping that other groups were here tonight as well and would join us or me with a lawmaking idea. We will try this in Germany.
Thank you very much.
And if I might add, in the case of the Netherlands, we had a meeting with the Doctors Against Forced Organs Harvesting and the Dutch Falun Gong Foundation. At the day of the meeting, that's about a year ago, we presented a petition to the Dutch Parliament. So we had a direct confrontation with the members of parliament of various groups in parliament, where we could both hand over the report, which is an important and very good report, and also had a one-to-one discussion with members of parliament, and where we could actually ask them to raise the issue in parliament. At the end of the year, there's always the budget discussion, and there's a human rights chapter in the budget for foreign affairs, and that always enables individual MPs to raise issues like this. But you have to get in touch with individual members of parliament. If you would simply write a letter as a foundation of Falun Gong to Parliament, the Standing Committee of Foreign Affairs, that would not do the job. You need one, in the lobbying, you need one-to-one contact with MPs, individual MPs.
Yes, thank you. And Mr. Ghulam Alipour, I'd like to hear your take in Sweden as well, unless you have something else to share.
I would like, if someone publishes such a report, like let's say Netherlands, they should spread it, because I haven't had any update about what is happening in a report, and I would like to have an update, because when you have that material, you maybe write a written question to a minister, maybe you have a debate with a minister about this issue, and then you know what you're talking about. You have an updated report that you can work with. So it is very important to spread such reports to all parliamentarians in Europe that are interested in this issue and to work with this issue.
Yes, Dr. King, please.
Very quickly, I completely agree with Madame Höchst and all the other MPs and former MPs here tonight about national laws. But I think since it's been 26 years since the beginning of the persecution, many countries, states in America have instituted these laws, and sometimes they're not applied or not followed up, and I think it doesn't address the real problem, which is happening in China. And this, I think, is the next step, as well as changing national laws, is to go and look what's happening in China.
Mr. Mattis, you've been spearheading this for many years now. What can you expand on that idea that a doctor just spoke about? How could we make a change and bring awareness from what's happening in China? Oh, you are muted.
Excuse me, Dr. Wong, when you have a time, Dr. Wong wants to add a few points. We have the time. Okay, well, let me just answer that question, and then we'll go on to Dr. Wong. I would say the answer to that question is not one answer. I think in order to spread awareness, everybody does it in different ways, with their own communities, with their own contacts, with their own skills, and the way to spread awareness is get everybody aware, and that can't be done in one simple way. But I also think what Harold says is right. I mean, we can change the system around the world outside of China, and it might stop transplant tourism into China. But it's not going to stop the killing of prisoners of conscience in China for their organs, which because the recipients of those organs are not just foreigners. Far from it. It's mostly Chinese, and I think one has to. If we're focusing just on that in terms of China, I mean, what you've got in China is a Chinese Communist Party. China's Communist Party thinks politically about what threatens its survival and what helps its survival. Right now, the political cost to China for the mass killing of Falun Gong and other prisoners of conscience for their organs is slight. They make a lot of money out of it, as others have heard, to get rid of political opposition, and the pushback is relatively small. But if you can increase the political cost to the Communist Party from what they're doing, which is linked to increased awareness, then the party will re-equilibrate. I mean, they have moved on this file, mostly cosmetically, setting up a donation system with tiny donations, setting up laws which are not obeyed, making promises or statements which have no reality to them. I mean, so they're constantly shifting, but at some point, if they realize that cosmetics alone will not work, there's the potential of getting them to change in substance by increasing the political cost. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, thank you, David, Mr. David Mattis. I'd like to now call on Dr. Wong. My question for you is, how should the Chinese Communist Party's actions be classified in light of their conduct, and why? Oh, I believe we're muted on your end.
The CCP's persecution of Falun Gong, especially the mass killing involving live organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners, constitutes state genocide and crimes against humanity. Moreover, the CCP has launched transnational persecution against Falun Gong, employing various and restricted warfare and intimidation tactics to carry out multiple terrorist attacks against the Falun Gong religious community in the international arena, including against Shenyuan Performing Arts. For example, the Global Service Center for Quitting the CCP office, located in Flushing, New York, received 8 bomb threats in just 20 days between April 20th to May 10th of this year. Therefore, the CCP's behavior should be classified as follows. The Chinese Communist Party is a state terrorist organization, and the government it leads constitutes a criminal regime.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wong. Sorry, is there more? Okay, so I'd like to know, this is a question for Dr. Harold King. It's said that with the extinction of a language, humankind loses a part of its cultural diversity. Now, with the Chinese government's intent to eliminate Falun Gong and its tenets of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, what would humankind lose if Falun Gong and its spiritual practice were indeed silenced to death?
Thank you for that often unaddressed question. Well, to put it in simple words, I think humankind would lose its humanity, would lose its human dignity, and it's the sanctity of life, of every life on this planet. That's what they would lose. So it's a big, it's very important. When Jiang Zemin saw Falun Gong, he realized that if all Chinese were applying truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance in their everyday life, they would see through the lies, the violence, and the intolerance of the party. So this was unbearable for him. Similarly for the international community, who for the moment has stayed relatively silent on these crimes. In fact, what they're doing is following the Chinese Communist Party line. In fact, accepting that there should be no compassion, no truthfulness, and no forbearance in anyone's life. And I for one disagree with that. I think those factors, human values, are essential for humanity, in fact. What's important, I think, in this is that if we lose our humanity, where are we going? Who are we? We're going to get lost and maybe destroyed, who knows, by following the Chinese Communist Party's ideology. So speaking out against their this ideology, supporting truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, supporting the Falun Gong practitioners, learning about their practice and on why Jiang Zemin was so intent on destroying it. These things will help people to apply maybe truthfulness, compassion, forbearance in their own lives, to be able to see through, just like Jiang Zemin was worried about, to see through what's actually happening and how dangerous it is for all humanity.
Yes, Mr. David Mattis. Oh, you're muted on your end.
Okay, it seems to automatically mute on me. But I wonder about the premise of your question. I mean, I don't think you can kill an idea. I've traveled a lot on this issue, and what I see around the world is that practitioners of Falun Gong, mostly in different countries, are locals. They're not Chinese nationals, Chinese expatriates. I mean, obviously that's the case in China, but pretty well everywhere else, the preponderance and sometimes the only practitioners are local nationals. Xi Jinping is identified in October 22 Falun Gong as the primary enemy of the party, and the reason he says that is that they bear witness to what the party's doing, much more so than anybody else, and that's going to continue. The party basically is ideologically gutted. It doesn't represent an idea. It's just a power structure. And it's a lot more fragile than Falun Gong. And long after the party is gone, the Falun Gong community will remember what the party has done. And that will persist.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. King, please.
Very quickly, I'll let Maria answer as well. I was just going to say, I completely agree with David, and that well, it's all of humanity that's at risk here. So speaking up and revealing this truth about what's happening in China and getting through this blockage that I was talking about before, about the horrors of genocide, so that humanity can save itself, literally. Thank you.
Professor Chung, I'd like to call on you as well.
Thank you. I think we need to be aware of the Chinese Communist Party's exporting of their domination and coercion around the world, not only through the Belt and Road Initiative, but also through transnational repression. So through these channels, they are trying to normalize what their values, what their political goals are in foreign countries. So they are basically hoping to replace the CCP goals with our own country's democratic goals. So if we continue to allow these transnational repression, exporting hate propaganda and disinformation, and normalizing that as a way of life for people to take on, it would be very dangerous. And it's basically the opposite of truth, compassion, and tolerance.
Dr. Wong, I'd like to call on you. You have a unique situation where you were trained as a surgeon in China and lived in China for many years, and now you live outside of China. So I'd like to know, did you see this unfold in day-to-day life in China, or was it a very silent and quiet thing? Could you share, please?
OK， 现在我打开摄像头。OK， go ahead. Countries around the world should list anyone suspected of participating in live organ harvesting for criminal investigation and prosecute them for crimes against humanity, allowing for arrest and trial at any time. Those who aid, support, or host such individuals should be considered accomplices.
Thank you. I'd like to call on Professor Chung. Could you expand a little bit more on China's efforts to export their persecution outside of China?
Yeah, like in most of the countries, majority of Chinese media already bought up by the Chinese consulate. So they're already spreading a lot of these propaganda or disinformation about what's going on within China. They also influence Western media. And with trade, they also infiltrate the governments. Like in our own country, Canada, some politicians are being donated a huge amount of money during the election, and also the Chinese Communist Party nurture their own candidates to participate in federal election and different levels of government's election. So the infiltration and interference of the Chinese Communist Party is actually in every facets of society. So if we don't pay attention to that, it is very easily take over because they are using very soft strategies like people-to-people interaction, just getting connections with all kinds of institutions and groups in different countries through the United Front work department. And it is easily being affected and bought into with the trade and also cultural exchanges, different forms of cooperation that these interference would be very ingrained in different countries. So we need to be very aware of that.
Thank you. It's, we've established today, and it's been established that there's live organ harvesting, there's persecution, and we also are coming to see that there are tentacles of persecution outside of China in these various soft forms, as you mentioned. I'd like to ask this question to the panel. Why do we believe the CCP wants to eliminate Falun Gong? What's their intention? Sure.
I would say that it's itself. It wants to protect itself and make sure it dominates the world. Basically, it's protecting itself at all costs, even if the rest of the world can see the Chinese Communist Party kill people so that it can maintain power and spend billions around the world, interfering with media, interfering with governments, and even companies, societies. They're there just for themselves, I think.
Yeah, I could add to that. We do have the original memorandum from Jiang Zemin to the Central Committee about why he wanted Falun Gong banned, and that eventually became official Chinese policy. And there was a lot of leakage at the time because Falun Gong was popular and spread throughout the party. So we do have that original memorandum. And what he says is Falun Gong is spiritual and the party is atheist. Falun Gong, it relies on ancient Chinese traditions. The party is modern. Falun Gong has a mobilization capacity because there was this huge crowd in central China in central Beijing near Tiananmen Square protesting some arrest of Falun Gong practitioners in Tianjin, which the party didn't know was happening, and they were alarmed that it happened. It was the biggest crowd in central Beijing since the Tiananmen Square massacre, the Falun Gong community is very critical of the party, but before the banning, they were not, they had no, before the banning, no political content whatsoever, and even now they're only a kind of discourse is human rights violations, but there's no political cohesion beyond that. What the party was concerned about, at least, I mean, there was a debate within the party, but those who were on the side of banning Falun Gong were concerned that even though Falun Gong wasn't political, wasn't opposed to communism at the time, they didn't believe it. I mean, their beliefs were elsewhere. I mean, their first, what mattered to the most was not the party. And at the time they were banned, the party estimated there was 70 million. The practitioners estimated there was 100 million. I mean, if it got to 200 million, 500 million, 800 million, the party would just wither away. And I think that was what was concerning them.
Yes, Mr. Schorst, please.
Thank you so much. Well, I think that communism senses a threat out of Falun Gong. Communism lives by divide et impera, separating the poor from the rich, the young from the old, etc., etc. And they live and thrive on the everlasting fight against each other. What if people turned their perspective into the vibes of Falun Gong, forbearance, compassion, truthfulness? People could be happy and could be well content and live happily ever after. This is a thing that communism cannot let happen, because people living like that, great people, billions of people living like that, can no longer be controlled. And this is what I think that communism is about, to be in control. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Professor Chung.
I think we have to remember what Jiang Zemin said at the eve before he launched the persecution in 1999. He basically wrote to his political bureau members and said, we cannot let Falun Gong to override the Marxist ideology. So he basically asked them to be sober and not being challenged by the Falun Gong's ideology. Basically, the ideology is truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. But he saw it as a ideological challenge to Marxism, which is what it's based on. So this is the ideological fight that he launched upon, which is based on the conflict model of Marxism. So that is something that we need to look at from this angle to understand why they persecute Falun Gong.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the parliamentarians here, is there a general hesitancy within Parliament of these various countries to address a communist regime head on? Is it something that is generally shied away from, or are there other reasons for the hesitancy to make progress on this?
If I might,
there is no objection to address a communist, even if it's not a communist or a government in China, because I believe that David Mattis is right. This is not about communism. This is a power structure that is controlling China, and therefore more obvious groups in China, like the Uyghurs or the Tibetans or Taiwan or Hong Kong, these issues are addressed in the Dutch parliament and worldwide far more often than the Falun Gong issue. And that only proves that when there is a larger majority, like UN or EU, addressing the human rights related to Uyghurs, for instance, and international organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and others, then it's easier for individual parliamentarians and a parliament in general to address the human rights related to that group. Now, that is not the case with Falun Gong. Why? And maybe we could urge these organizations. Why does Amnesty International put a lot of effort in the human rights of Uyghurs and of Tibetans, but not that much in Falun Gong? Falun Gong is not on their agenda. Why is that the case? We should ask them and maybe get this widely accepted and generally supported organization to pay more attention to the fate of Falun Gong practitioners. So I think it's the fact that it's unknown, it's not popular, and other groups are wider supported by international organizations.
Thank you for that. Yes, David Mattis.
I wonder if I could just answer that question, why there's more attention to others than Falun Gong. I have been involved with some of these organizations and on this issue, and what I see is for the government of China, Falun Gong is their number one concern, what they see as their number one threat, and it has an impact on the way they relate to the people who talk to them about human rights. If you talk about the Uyghurs or Hong Kong or so on to Amnesty or whoever, or a foreign government, they'll disagree, they'll insult you, they'll contradict, but they'll carry on the conversation. You talk Falun Gong, they walk out of the room. It's the end of the conversation. And the result is that people who are trying to get some traction with China would rather go on a discussion where there can be some movement than where there can be done. Recently, for instance, the Canadian government sanctioned a bunch of Chinese for persecution of Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Falun Gong. Chinese, in turn, sanctioned 20 Canadians for giving the government false information about the people who were being sanctioned. And I was one of the 20. But when the Chinese sanctioned the 20, they said because of Uyghurs, because of Tibetans, they didn't mention Falun Gong. Which was a deliberate strategy. I mean, that's what Xi Jinping said October 22. Don't say anything about Falun Gong because it's just too important to them. And I think, unfortunately, I mean, what should be most important to them should be most important to us. But we've got the reverse, that because it's most important to them, other people talk about other things.
It's very interesting. So does our strategy change then, or do we continue with discussions like this, get it on the forefront?
Well, if you're asking me, I don't think there's one strategy that's going to work. I think you have to try everything. I wouldn't say this is a useless discussion, but I don't think it should be the end of the matter. I think we have to carry it elsewhere.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Dr. King.
Just coming back to a point I made earlier, what David has just described is how the the Chinese Communist Party, makes people uncomfortable because they can pressure them, and everyone instinctively knows what has to be avoided to be able to communicate with the Chinese Communist Party. But I think what's lacking on our side is accountability. As Harry Van Bommel just mentioned, why does Amnesty International not defend Falun Gong? It's the same for other much bigger NGOs. Why are they avoiding it? We should hold them accountable. They should be reminded why they exist and why our government exists and why the United Nations exists. How can we leave one group or one country kill people freely and not talk about it? It becomes absurd and makes everyone look ridiculous, really. So we've got to apply accountability and address these inequalities as soon as possible.
Thank you for that. Mr. Golam Alipur, yes.
Yes, I think it's important to adjust the way that organization work to the way that parliament works. So I have a dialogue with the Taipei mission in Sweden. I have a dialogue with the Tibetans. There comes Tibetan parliamentarians to Sweden from their parliament in exile. So you can have a dialogue with them. And it's important that Falun Gong also has a regular dialogue with parliamentarians and gives us what policies do they want, and clear policies, so you can work with that. That is also important, a regular dialogue.
Thank you. Mrs. Husht, I'd like to ask, how can we get more support from NGOs and different entities? Is that something that would have to be spearheaded through Parliament or from a different angle?
Well, through many angles. We need to have more petitions in order to be in the position to have them presented in German Bundestag, for example, or the Council of Europe, which is the Human Rights Council. So we need to produce papers that we can show to the public and discuss in public, new reports, updates, etc., to counter the framing what's going on. In Germany, we've just had the framing that Falun Gong is something like the AfD or something, radical right, far right or something. They try to put it into a corner and never to be addressed again. And we need to counter it. So in order to interest the NGOs for this subject of Falun Gong, perhaps we need to found a new one, which is absolutely just concentrated on Falun Gong, to have better representation. I believe that, for example, the Uyghurs could rely on the support of the Ummah on other Muslim countries, and this is a large support, which is not happening for Falun Gong at the moment. So we parliamentarians, we need to address those NGOs, we need to write letters, try to have acquaintances with them, and try to interest them into the matters of the genocide of Falun Gong. But this is a long process. So the more people we are lobbying for, in order to get this topic out of the corner, the better it is.
Thank you for sharing an excellent idea as well about creating a new NGO. I'd like to ask Professor Chung, could you expand on that, or do you have any comment on that?
I'm so glad to hear from members of parliament and parliamentarians that they would take on this issue, because it is not easy. And I understand Falun Gong practitioners have been trying to work with parliamentarians in different countries. And like in Canada, we took 15 years to pass a law to prevent the complicity on forced organ harvesting, not only in China, but around the world. But the origin of that bill was targeting the forced organ harvesting in China. the effort from parliamentarians definitely would help a lot. And I hope this would expand. And I'm very hopeful that this is going to happen with all the parliamentarians here taking on this issue. And as more politicians take on it, Falun Gong will be on the forefront again and not being forgotten.
Thank you, Professor. I think we are all very happy for all the dedication and support from the parliamentarians. It's great to see. I wanted to call on Dr. Wong, and specifically, I think the audience wants to know a little bit more about what the persecution, the forced organ harvesting, how that took place in China. And then also, what do we need to understand about the detention centers in China? What does the West need to understand about that?
Okay. First, I would like to tell you that the forced live organ harvesting is a national genocide launched by the CCP. It is led by the CCP. It is not the individual. It is not done by the individual hospitals, but rather it is systematically led and directed by the regime of the CCP, which manipulates all the national machine, which includes the party, the politics, and the military, and all of the medical systems, which is launching the systematic genocide against Falun Gong practitioners. Therefore, the CCP is mobilizing the resources, the machines, the manpower, and the political power of the whole country to persecute Falun Gong. It controls all the media to slander against Falun Gong, and it manipulates all the legal and the legislation machines to persecute Falun Gong. And internationally, it utilizes the benefits and the trading economic interests with other countries to force other countries to neglect the persecution of Falun Gong. Hence, in the deeper sense, it blocks all the news, all the information about the persecution of Falun Gong, so they can successfully conduct the persecution against the Falun Gong under the table. That is why the persecution against Falun Gong is so serious, and the international community still doesn't have enough understanding, recognition, and acknowledgement about the persecution, because they don't realize the seriousness about the persecution. More seriously, and the conflict between the concepts of Falun Gong, which is truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, and the concepts about the CCP, which is, the violence and truthfulness, That conflict is the fundamental conflict. And the measures and the methods of the persecution Falun Gong includes the live organ harvesting, started from 1999, and it has been lasting for 26 years up to now. And the persecution has been nationwide. The persecution on such a big scale, once this persecution is exposed, it will lead a direct result, which is the degeneration of the CCP. Therefore, the CCP is trying all its best to hide up the persecution of Falun Gong because it directly concerns whether it will continue to exist or not. That's the biggest difficulty for the West to realize the situation in Falun Gong. I can tell you that the CCP's live organ harvesting against Falun prisoners started from 1999 and it has never stopped one single day. Furthermore, it has been lasting nationwide. And also, it is still going on and expanded to the international arena now. Why? Because it is led by the national system. It is destroying the fundamental, the basic moral bottom line of the society. And the legal and supervision of the society has disappeared. And this large and systematic slandering and national terrorism has led the whole society to neglect the persecution and choose to be silent. That is the problem of the whole society in China. That's why I'm telling you the issue of Falun Gong, it is the fundamental issue of the human being, the whole human being. It concerns the safety of the whole human being. Once this truth is exposed, and I believe it will be exposed really quick, and it will lead to the fundamental change of the whole human beings, not only Falun Gong.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. I'd like to jump in.
谢谢你，王先生。
Appreciate you. And you made some great points there. Actually ask Mr. Mattis, Mr. David Mattis, in an attempt of self-preservation and maintaining its legitimacy and power, it seems the CCP has sectioned off practitioners into detention centers and brainwashing centers. In your years of research, can you share a little bit about that?
Well, indeed, there's been mention of it before. Falun Gong practitioners are systematically arrested, and they're asked to recant, denounce, renounce, and if they sign the proper documents and convince the jailers they're actually going to stop Falun Gong, they'll be let go. If not, they're tortured. If they renounce, denounce, recant after torture, they're let go. The rest are kept in arbitrary indefinite detention and become a vast organ donor pool. I've interviewed originally from when the ban first occurred in July, or at least was announced in July 1999. There was a lot of protests, and a lot of the protesters were just caught and released, sent back home and told to stop, and their environment was told to stop. But that didn't really work. So the result was that after November 1999, there was a meeting of the party, and they basically said they had to ramp up the repression in order to stop this, and they did. I personally have interviewed a number of Falun Gong practitioners who got out of detention and got out of China, and at least all the ones I've interviewed, they all recanted. I mean, eventually when they got out, they started practicing again. But I personally didn't, except for the early days, meet anybody who got out who didn't recant. So I think that's what we're dealing with here is a kind of a thought repression, which ultimately, of course, hasn't worked. And I identify with what Dr. Wong said, that really what you're dealing with here is a thread in a tapestry, which if you pull will unravel the whole tapestry. This killing of Falun Gong for their organs, I mean, part of the reason it's so little known is there's so much effort of the Chinese government to repress that information. I mean, there's obviously the problem of we don't have high visibility of the abuse because of the problems I mentioned before, but there's also a tremendous effort to cover up. It's, as I say, they see Falun Gong as their primary threat, and they see the exposure of this issue within this primary threat is the primary problem. And so what you're dealing with, of course, is a wealthy, powerful, well-staffed criminal organization, and so it becomes a problem.
Yes, thank you. And Dr. King, yes.
Just to bounce back on what Dr. Wong was saying, and David, there were two French parliamentarians who clearly explained during another one of our seminars is that the Chinese Communist Party does not think like the rest of humanity. It doesn't have the same means of functioning. It doesn't view the world the same way as everyone else does. So it has to spend a lot of money, effort to make sure that everybody believes it's like everyone else. Yeah, we don't say the President Xi Jinping. Yeah, he's a Secretary General. He wasn't elected by anyone. But this media and total control of the world would make us believe that Xi Jinping and the Communist Party are just normal like everyone else. And those are also factors that we have to take into account when we consider the CCP.
Dr. King, I'd like to ask this. You're suggesting that the Communist Party thinks very differently, and I think their actions stand to support that. But would you say that at its core is its Marxist theory, or is there something deeper than that?
That's an interesting question. I think the Marxist theory is pretty, as Madame Hirsch was saying, that it's total destruction or continual fighting against everything and everyone. Fighting, I think, who was it? Was it Mao who said fighting against great joy in fighting God, fighting nature, fighting humans, fighting everything, and even fighting within themselves, as we saw, because visibly in 1999, many members of the Chinese Communist Party were also practicing Falun Gong. So this is shows how badly the Chinese people need to return to their traditions, to their real culture, and not be continually manipulated by this Marxist theory. I've heard that Marxism goes towards more extreme cases, destruction, so it could be even Satanism, something really awful. I mean, why would they want to fight everyone and everything? It's just so unbelievable. It's difficult to believe. So, I think that the Marxist and the evolution of Marxism in the communist world have just amplified this total destruction ideology.
Thank you, Dr. King. I'd like to actually now bring our attention to Professor Chung. You know, we might stand by and watch how the CCP pursues to destroy Falun Gong and its spiritual practice, a practice that emphasizes living with honesty, good-heartedness, and tolerance day to day. What's the risk that the CCP wouldn't stop after eliminating Falun Gong, but then continue to destroy Judeo-Christian belief in order to eradicate compassion and other religions?
Over the 20-odd years, we have already seen that because the international world hasn't acted enough to deal with the forced organ harvesting issue against the Falun Gong, it has been spread to the Uyghurs. It has been spread to other innocent citizens and also internationally. It is an industrial chain that the Chinese Communist regime is extending through its Belt and Road to countries like Cambodia, to countries not only the technology, the ideology, but also the benefiting from it. So it's important that people around the world need to look at this issue very seriously. Otherwise, the risk of spreading to other innocent citizens is happening, actually. So I think all politicians or NGOs need to be vigilant about this.
Yes, Mr. Matus.
Yes, first of all, in terms of Marxism, if you want to encapsulate Marxism, I suppose you could say it's from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. But that's not really what the party's ideology is. You could encapsulate the party's ideology from each according to his ability to support the party, to each according to the amount of support he's giving to the party. So it's just party focused rather than individual focused. In terms of the spread to other religions, we already see that in China, of course, with the Uyghurs. There's also house Christians that are victims of forced organ harvesting, and the Tibetans too, the Buddhists. Although with the Tibetans and the house Christians, the numbers are much smaller than with the Uyghurs and right now than Falun Gong. But we also seeing it spreading to foreign countries, this forced organ harvesting. Maria mentioned Cambodia, and China's actively trying to spread the practice abroad. It was recently in Singapore and Malaysia, and the transplant doctors there were saying that they've got patients going to Cambodia, and there's Chinese surgeons there doing transplants, and it's like any other threat to human rights. You don't stop it; it spreads.
It's a very interesting point, Mr. Matus. Appreciate that. I'd like to. Does anyone else want to add to that or expand on that? Yes, Mrs. Hoyce.
Well, I'm very impressed on your understanding of Marxism and communism. Marx was a citizen of Trier, which is quite close to where I live, and I never understood Marx completely because it feels so wrong. Communism focuses on the outwards of the individual. Yeah, the individual needs to enter an endless fight against no matter what the government or the party designs to be the enemy. Falun Gong and Christianity are on the other side turned into the individual. Yeah, it focuses on the good heart and the soul of the individual, and it is therefore capable of bringing people together, because when you're in balance with yourself, you can relate to other people. You don't need the endless fight. So I'm very, very hopeful that the good Falun Gong, the Christianity, will never die, and China can recapture this heart of China, Falun Gong, and return to people to relate to each other and stop the endless fighting. Well, I'm no supporter of Marx whatsoever, and I would go tremendous lengths in order to stop communism. And well, the little sister of communism is socialism. I would really like to not have it anymore on Earth.
Yes, thank you for that. I have a personal question for you as well, Mrs. Hoist. What got you into this fight? It seems you have a deepened understanding of communism, Marxism. What got you into supporting and fighting for Falun Gong?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm against things like exploiting people. I'm pro-Christianity, I'm pro-Falun Gong because they see the good in the world, and I would really love to be on the good side and protect what is good and durable, good for people and societies all over the world. Exploiting people, killing people, what is happening in China, this is so horrible that it is offending my heart. And so I'm in full fight against those crimes against humanity.
Thank you, and we appreciate you. I'd also like to ask Mr. Gholam Alipour, what got you into this fight as well, and this effort to stop forced organ harvesting?
Oh, it was the organ trafficking, the idea that you steal organs from people against their will. It was disgusting, and I just felt that I should do something about that.
Thank you. And I might as well ask Mr. Van Bommel, what got you into this this fight?
I've always been critical about the human rights politics or the absence of human rights politics of China. Of course, Tibetans and Uyghurs have always been on the political agenda. And it took a while before Falun Gong got in touch with me as a member of parliament. Taiwan was there, Hong Kong was there, but Falun Gong, it took years for Falun Gong practitioners, and they're not very well organized in the Netherlands. And like I said, there are no human rights groups supporting them in the Netherlands. So it took them a long time to get their cause on the political agenda, and I was the one addressing it. By the way, I don't see Falun Gong as something attacking communism. What I think is that Falun Gong, just as the Tibetans and the Uyghurs and the issue of Taiwan and also Hong Kong, they are a threat to the integrity of China as a world power. And the example of the Soviet Union collapsing is the nightmare of those in China who are in charge, and therefore they would fight anything, even if it was a group of chess players having large numbers and being able to organize people. Then the Communist Party would also fight the union of chess players. It's just that the chess players are not that very well organized in China, but they would fight them as well. I'm pretty sure of that.
Thank you for that. As we round up, I'd like to just ask everyone to share with the audience, the panelists, of course, one last final minute, a final remark or a lesson that was learned from today's discussion. We can start with Harold. Dr. King, please.
Very quickly, to bounce back on what the others are just saying. When I discovered forced organ harvesting back in 2007, I was not only disgusted, but I immediately saw that it was going to be, or going to become, or could become uncontrollable. Who wouldn't be a victim of forced organ harvesting in the world if we allow it to spread? And that was the biggest worry for me, and why I've been working all these years with DAFOH, is to stop this spreading everywhere else, because it could, and we're actually getting signs of this. So my last few words are, let's stop this spreading. Let's stop. Let's make people accountable. Let's stop forced organ harvesting in China. We have the power. We have sanctions. We have the United Nations that can do things. We have the International Court of Justice. Let's use them. We haven't used them yet. So thank you.
Thank you. Professor Chung, I'd like to ask for your review of the discussion.
What I see is we need to have equal access of different affected group of genocide and having their voice heard. And when they are so vulnerable, other parts of society need to chime in and give them the voice and work with them and walk with them to give the voice. So it's important that politicians and NGOs help to the world to understand what is preventing people to hear about Falun Gong voices, because it's very straightforward to understand an ethnic genocide, but it's not very easy to understand a genocide against thoughts and minds and philosophies and faith. So especially the Chinese Communist Party use a lot of ways to silence the Falun Gong. It is important for different parts of society to understand all these tricks and strategies of of the Chinese Communist Party, and help people to understand the cause of Falun Gong and be able to break through this silence.
Thank you very much. Dr. Wong, I'd like to call on you for a 1-minute review of your experience today.
Okay. Again, I would say thanks to the host and all the attendees, distinguished attendees of this webinar. Last but not least, I would sincerely invite all the attendees today to spread my script and my speech to the more organizations and more aspects of the society as many as possible. I mentioned in my script, in my speech, I mentioned 2 books about the live organ harvesting. One book is the solid proofs of the live organ harvesting. The name will be confirmed. And this book includes substantial proofs and the direct proofs about the live organ harvesting. All those proofs are solid and substantial, which include and the recording of the investigation recording of the political, the 5 members of the central political community of the Chinese Communist Party. Those are real and direct recordings. and they are the Minister of the National Security and the Minister of the National Health Department, and the witness at the real site of the live organ harvesting, and 45 directors of the hospitals and the surgeons of the 40 hospitals who have participated in the live organ harvesting. Their direct witness and all those recordings clearly talked about or refer to or recognize the truth of the live organ harvesting.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. We should wrap it up.
谢谢汪先生，谢谢汪先生谢谢汪先生。Okay, thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Van Bommel, you could share your last final words.
Yes, thank you very much for organizing this webinar. I think it's very important to have people from various backgrounds, doctors, lawyers, politicians, to agree on the importance of this issue. And I think it's we should organize at national level, like my fellow MP from Germany said. At the national level, we should look at angles that we can use to get politicians aboard, to get politicians to act, to get politicians to speak out on this issue. First of all, get the news, because to some people it's still news that this is happening, to get the news out, and then to get people to act. And I'm willing to do whatever I can in the Netherlands to get Falun Gong practitioners and their supporters in the right channel towards the Dutch Parliament and even to European Parliament.
Thank you very much for your contributions. Mr. David Mattis, any final words here? You're on mute.
Yeah, I have a couple of observations. I can hear from this panel that Falun Gong is different from other victim communities in their organizational strength and the attention they get. And there's a number of different reasons for that. But one is that Falun Gong is not an organization. It's a set of exercises with a spiritual foundation, a Chinese equivalent of yoga. And you don't have to join anything to do the exercises. And the other practitioners may not even know that you're doing the exercises unless you tell them. There are some individual organizations here and there, but it doesn't have the organizational structure of a lot of these other victim groups. And that's inherent in the nature of Falun Gong. And it may be helpful in China, where these other groups that do have structures tend to be taken over by the Communist Party, but it does represent a different phenomenon abroad. And what I would add is that in any case, what we're dealing with is not just a crime against Falun Gong. We're dealing with a crime against humanity. It's a crime against all of us, and we have to be cognizant of that. The persecution of prisoners of conscience for their organs, I mean, it started in big numbers with Falun Gong, but it became big numbers with Uyghurs in 2017. Now you get Chinese young people disappearing off the streets in significant numbers. You've got infants being used for transplantation. There's attempts to spread it abroad. You can't wait until somebody comes to you to get your organs for forced organ harvesting to try to stop the practice. You've got to deal with it before that. And I think we need to realize the necessity to do that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you, Mr. David Mattis. Professor Chung, any last final words here?
I think it's important to have a joint effort, a whole of society approach, and work together. It's like starting from something small, but something small can grow big. So I appreciate you organize this seminar, and also so many politicians and different peoples are speaking out. And I think we should hear from other politicians that hasn't spoken yet.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we only have a couple minutes left, so 1 minute each. Mr. Ghulam Ali Pour, any final words?
Yes, I think it's very important to have more networking among parliamentarians who work with this issue together with organizations. I think it's very important to fight the misinformation of the Chinese state, because that is something that is making it harder for Falun Gong to reach out to politicians and talk about these issues. I think also that there is an agreement among people in Europe and the United States that organ trafficking is wrong, and you should mobilize around that issue. That is something that will mobilize both people and politicians. And something that is related to these issues is the influence of CCP in Europe. You have to weaken that, and then more people will speak out, because the misinformation and the influence, it influences even municipalities, even government agencies. So that is important to weaken that influence.
Great. Thank you very much. And Mrs. Husht, any final words?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I would like to focus on things we could do. And I did a little brainstorming all over the whole time when I listened to you, because many ideas were already mentioned, and I would like to focus on them. So I would really appreciate to work on national laws and enforce them. For spreading the information, we need to contact more parliamentarians, have further seminars, webinars, and we need to contact and write letters to the NGOs why they do not focus on that matter. Perhaps we need to have a new organization, a non-governmental organization with the sole focus on Falun Gong and other people subject to genocide. Perhaps we can even mount an online university like the PragerU, with influencers spreading the news and the information on Instagram, etc., etc. Perhaps not on TikTok, because it's controlled by China and the CCP. But I'm really glad to have met you here, and I'm looking very forward to go the next steps. I have so many ideas. I've got so many good contacts who would love to work with you together. When you say go, we go for it, and we pray.
Excellent, excellent ideas. Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to wish and thank all of our speakers for this vibrant roundtable discussion that expanded our insights and understanding. These are needed to find the next steps and solutions to end these atrocities. And again, we thank all of our panelists, and we hope that you who joined us in this session had a meaningful experience and have gained a broadened awareness. So thank you all, and have a wonderful night. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.